Hey, how's it going? Ryan Simon. I chose to do a video blog for my final project. The movie I chose to do was The Patriot, directed by Ronald Emmerich and starring Mel Gibson. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I chose it because, one, yeah, it's one of my favorite movies, and two, it has a lot to do with international relations. So I'm just going to give you a quick, brief summary of the movie The Patriot. Starring Mel Gibson, takes place during the American Revolution. Benjamin is the name of the main character, played by Mel Gibson. He's a father of 7 who was born and raised in South Carolina. He fought during the French and Indian Wars, so he does already have some war experience. In the beginning of the movie, you don't see the death of his wife, but he recently just lost his wife, so he's stuck raising his 7 kids on his plantation alone by himself during this crazy time of, the American Revolution, and everyone's starting to rally to fight for their freedom. He doesn't want to be part of the war originally. He thinks South Carolina should not be involved in it, but eventually his eldest son, wants to go to war and he wants to help his country, so he eventually does leave and he then does serve the country. But he ends up coming back later into the movie, and you see he's wounded and he got injured. The British then invade the plantation on which he lives, Benjamin lives, and they eventually surround his house. They kill a lot of colonial soldiers who are there at the house, and they steal Benjamin's son Gabriel, his eldest son who served in war, and they sentenced him to death, and they captured him and they were going to hang him. Mel Gibson and his sons get together, get a bunch of guns, and they go fight the British troops who had taken his eldest son captive, and they eventually overpower the British, rescue the son, and that's the turning point when he decides himself that he wants to get involved in the war. So as the movie continues, Benjamin proceeds to fight in the war and help the colonial side to achieve independence from Great Britain. You see a lot of battle scenes. They go from town to town. You see examples of the tragedies of war. Like, for one instance, a church was burned down full of a whole village of people inside of it. The British colonial soldiers just burnt it down with all those people in it. Benjamin actually discovered that burning church later. That was one of the tragedies in the movie. Eventually, Gabriel gets killed by a British protagonist. He's a general by the name of Tavington. Yeah, like I said, he's the main protagonist in the movie. He's the main commander of the British forces. He's the one you see throughout the movie commanding a lot of the British forces, and is involved in a lot of the battles between Benjamin, especially the finale. The final battle between them is pretty epic. The climax and final battle of the movie happens at Cowpen. Basically, the British spot the colonial army and they have the final big battle. This is the main scene between Benjamin and Travington. At first it looks like the colonials are about to get overpowered. Their untrained militia just doesn't look nearly as powerful and as devastating as the British troops. But as the battle goes on, even though it looks like they're about to lose, Mel Gibson runs in with the American flag and kind of goes all Braveheart on everyone and runs out in the middle of the battlefield and rallies the troops, and they end up rushing the British, and they end up winning that battle, and that was kind of the turning point for the war, and they ended up eventually winning the whole war from that moment. But that was the climax and one of the coolest scenes of the movie for sure. So after that final battle scene and Benjamin killed Tavington, the British protagonist, the movie basically ends peacefully by Benjamin returning home to his home in South Carolina, where a bunch of the colonial soldiers are building him a brand new house because his old one was wrecked by the British soldiers. So the ending scene is him with his family out there watching their new house getting built, and so everything ends good and everything ends happy for them. So that's pretty much the movie The Patriot in a nutshell. Now I'd like to discuss the movie in terms of international relations and how it can be used and applied to this class. I mean, obviously there are a lot of reasons and a lot of ways this movie can be connected to the course. The biggest connection I saw in the movie to this course was with liberalism. I thought there were a lot of elements of liberalism in the movie, and there were a lot of specific examples that really show how liberalism works in relation to our class. For example, to me, really, when I think about liberalism as a whole, I think of the American Revolution. This was a time period that had a lot of examples of liberalism. For example, John Locke. I thought this movie did a great job of showing that when the government intrudes the people's rights, and when a monarch grossly abuses its powers against the people, we have a right to overthrow that government. No, we have a duty to step up and let that government know that we're not going to take that. We're going to overthrow them, and that's our duties as a liberal society, to not let that powerful government control us. I think this was a great example of how you can only push the people so far until we'll eventually rebel and try to overthrow your government. Another obvious liberal moment was in the beginning of the movie. With regards to taxation without representation. The people felt that they were unfairly being ruled by a tyrant government 3,000 miles away, and they weren't even being represented as citizens of that country. So by liberalism logic, why should we be part of a country that doesn't have our best interests at heart, that isn't really truly trying to represent us? It's just a clear example of the government overstepping its boundaries and trying to rule us from 3,000 miles away. So I think that's another example in the classical case of liberalism, when we have to step up and we have to show the government that we're not just going to take that, we're going to overthrow them. There was another scene in the beginning of the movie. It was a town hall scene where the citizens of it made it really clear that they did not think of England as a legitimate form of government. They were saying their rights are being threatened by a tyrant 3,000 miles away. The King of England should not be ruling colonies because he doesn't have majority rule. He doesn't have the full support of the people. So by a true liberalistic approach, he can't have power and control of us because he's not the majority rule. Nor is he practicing a legitimate form of government on us. It's just basically one guy telling us what to do from thousands of miles away, which in classical realism states that's just unacceptable. The movie also related to liberalism in another way based off just of what they were fighting for. What the colonists were fighting for were basically the principles of liberalism themselves, which are individual rights, consent, limited government, and reason. These are the key factors of liberalism, and was really at the heart of what they were trying to fight for and what they were trying to get accomplished. Another really key component about liberalism is that at the heart of liberalism, it's about the individuals, not the state. So it has a focus on individuals. What the Britain colony was failing to do was take their well-beings into consideration. He was mostly just thinking about himself, his profits, and what he could do to benefit the people over who were actually in England, as opposed to trying to help the colonies out, and really wasn't geared towards our survival. That's one of the real issues I think the American people had with him at the time, is that his form of government was not respecting the individuals, but rather putting the state and the nation as a whole ahead of the individual. So to conclude, I think the movie The Patriot has a lot of relevance to this course and international relations as a whole. I think you can make an argument that you could fit this into a lot of the weeks for a movie review and then discussion forum, as we generally did in class. You could do it on many different weeks, but the one I think most makes sense for The Patriot is Module 5 or Week 5, Liberalism, and idealism. I think it definitely fits in here the most. Movie for the class to watch and really get to see some of the ideals of liberalism, and you get to see really some of the key components that make it work, and it really helps you to understand it a little better.